As Oliver Zimmerman glanced around his immaculate penthouse dining room, he couldn't shake the feeling that something significant was about to change in his life. The table was set with the finest china, crystal glasses catching the light from the chandelier he'd imported from Italy, and the caterers were putting final touches on a menu that had cost more than what most people spent on a month's rent. "Is the Shadhow Margox breathing properly?" Oliver asked his house manager, adjusting his cufflinks platinum with tiny sapphires that matched his eyes. "Yes, Mr. Zimmerman. Decanted 30 minutes ago, as you specified," replied the manager with a slight bow. At 34, Oliver had built Zimmerman Maritime from a small shipping logistics company into an international powerhouse worth billions. Success came easy to him, but tonight wasn't about business. It was about reconnecting with his younger sister, Samantha, who just returned from a year studying art restoration in Florence. The doorbell rang promptly at 7. Oliver straightened his navy Tom Ford suit jacket and walked toward the foyer. He heard his sister's familiar laughter before he saw her. "Ollie," Samantha squealed, throwing her arms around him, "I've missed you so much." "Missed you too, Sammy," he said, genuinely happy to see her. Her presence always brightened any room. "I hope you don't mind, but I brought someone," Samantha said, stepping aside to reveal a woman standing behind her. "This is Ruby Torres, my best friend from the restoration program. She just moved to New York and I couldn't leave her alone on her first weekend here." Oliver's prepared greeting died on his lips. Ruby Torres was nothing like he'd expected. She wore a simple emerald dress that complemented her olive skin tone perfectly. Her dark hair fell in soft waves past her shoulders, and her eyes, a warm amber color, held his gaze with unexpected directness. "I apologize for crashing your family dinner," Ruby said with a slight smile. Samantha insisted. "Not at all," Oliver found himself saying, surprised by the warmth in his own voice. "Any friend of Sammy's is welcome here." As he led them through his penthouse, Oliver was acutely aware of Ruby taking in her surroundings. Unlike most people who visited for the first time, she didn't seem impressed by the obvious displays of wealth. Instead, she lingered by his bookshelves, examining titles with genuine interest. "You have the complete first edition Hemingway collection," she noted, her finger gently tracing the spine of The Sun Also Rises. "And they're actually read, not just for show." "How can you tell?" Oliver asked, intrigued. "The slight crease in the spine, the way the pages aren't perfectly aligned anymore." She turned to him with a smile. Books should be loved, not just displayed. Something in her assessment pleased him more than any compliment about his success ever had. Dinner progressed with surprising ease. Oliver had worried the evening might be awkward. He hadn't seen Samantha in months, and Ruby was a complete stranger, but conversation flowed naturally between courses. "So, Ruby, Sammy tells me you're a restoration expert," Oliver asked as the server poured more wine. "I wouldn't call myself an expert yet," Ruby said. "I specialized in canvas paintings from the Renaissance period, but I'm still learning. That's actually why I moved here. I got a position at the Metropolitan Museum." "She's being modest," Samantha interjected. Ruby reconstructed a damaged Botticelli that everyone else had given up on. The museum director in Florence practically begged her to stay. A slight blush colored Ruby's cheeks. "It was a team effort. I just happened to notice something others missed." "Which was?" Oliver found himself genuinely curious. "That sometimes you need to look beyond what's directly in front of you to see the full picture," Ruby said. There was a pattern in the brushstrokes that suggested how the damaged sections should be restored. You had to step back to see it properly. Oliver nodded, thinking about how that philosophy applied to his own life. He'd built his empire by seeing opportunities others missed, by looking at the bigger picture when everyone else focused on immediate profits. As the evening progressed, Oliver found himself more and more drawn to Ruby. She wasn't like the women he typically dated, socialites and models who were more interested in his bank account than his thoughts. Ruby challenged him, disagreed with him about literature, and laughed openly when he made a terrible pun about maritime shipping. "I should probably get going," Ruby said as the dessert plates were cleared. I have an early meeting at the museum tomorrow. I'll call you a car, Oliver offered immediately. Oh, that's not necessary. I can take the subway. At this hour, absolutely not, Oliver said firmly. My brother, ever the protector, Samantha teased. But he's right, Ruby. Let him call a car. Consider it New York hospitality. While Samantha excused herself to use the restroom, Oliver and Ruby stood awkwardly in the foyer. Thank you for dinner, Ruby said. You didn't have to include me. I'm glad Samantha brought you, Oliver replied, surprised by his own sincerity. It's refreshing to meet someone who… Who what? Ruby asked when he didn't continue. Who sees beyond the surface, he finished. Something in her expression shifted, a momentary vulnerability quickly masked. That's what restoration teaches you. Everything has layers, paintings, books. People, Oliver added. Especially people, Ruby agreed with a small smile. The car arrived and Oliver walked Ruby to the elevator. Perhaps I could get a tour of your department at the Met sometime, he said, not ready to lose contact with her. I'd like that, Ruby replied. Though I warn you, I can talk about damaged canvas for hours. I'll risk it, Oliver said with a smile. After Ruby left, Samantha plopped down on his sofa with a knowing look. So, what did you think of Ruby? She seems nice, Oliver said noncommittally. Nice, that's it, Oliver Zimmerman. I saw the way you looked at her. You haven't been that engaged in conversation since your TED talk on sustainable shipping. She's interesting, Oliver conceded. She's single, brilliant, and secretly thinks you're cute, Samantha added with a grin. She said that, Oliver asked too quickly. No, but she didn't have to. I know my best friend. Samantha's expression grew more serious. But listen, Ollie, Ruby isn't like your usual companions. She doesn't care about money or status. Good, Oliver said firmly, because that's not what I'd want her interested in. 3 days later, Oliver stood in the conservation lab of the Metropolitan Museum, watching as Ruby carefully examined a damaged painting under specialized lighting. This is from the early 1700s, Ruby explained, not looking up from her work. The owner kept it in a humid room for decades, which caused the canvas to warp and the paint to crack. Oliver watched her hands move with precision and confidence, so different from the corporate boardrooms he was used to. Can it be saved? Almost everything can be saved with enough care and the right approach, Ruby said, finally looking up at him. It's just a matter of patience and understanding what you're working with. Her amber eyes held his, and Oliver had the distinct feeling she wasn't just talking about the painting. I was wondering if you'd like to have dinner with me, he said. Just the two of us this time. Ruby carefully set down her tools. Are you asking me on a date, Oliver? Yes, he replied simply. I am. A small smile played at her lips. I'd like that. But I need to be clear about something. I'm not impressed by expensive restaurants or flashy displays. Then I'll have to impress you with my conversation instead, Oliver said. How about tomorrow night? I know a little Italian place in the village that makes pasta the way my grandmother used to. That sounds perfect. The little Italian place was actually a hole-in-the-wall restaurant with only 8 tables, red check tablecloths, and a chef who'd known Oliver since before he made his first million. Ruby looked surprised when they arrived. This isn't what I expected, she admitted as they sat down. Too humble for the mighty shipping magnate, Oliver teased. Ruby laughed. No, just unexpected, in a good way. She looked around appreciatively. Places like this usually have the best food. Marco was my first boss, Oliver explained as the elderly chef waved at them from the kitchen. I washed dishes here when I was 17. He gave me a job when no one else would hire the angry kid with the chip on his shoulder. Angry, Ruby raised an eyebrow. That doesn't fit with the polished businessman I see now. I wasn't always polished, Oliver admitted. My father left when I was 12 and my mother worked 3 jobs to keep us afloat. I was angry at the world until Marco taught me to channel that energy into work. Is that how you got into shipping? Oliver nodded. Marco's brother worked at the docks, got me a job there after high school, and I noticed how inefficient the logistics were. Started my company with 1 small boat and a better system for tracking shipments. Ruby listened intently, her eyes never leaving his face. It's impressive what you've built. What about you? Oliver asked. How does someone become a painting restoration expert? My grandmother was a museum curator, Ruby explained. I spent my childhood surrounded by art. When I was 8, I watched a conservator bring a damaged painting back to life, and I was hooked. There's something magical about revealing what time has tried to hide. Their food arrived homemade gnocchi for Ruby and Marco's famous lasagna for Oliver. As they ate, the conversation flowed easily from art to business, from family to aspirations. You know, Ruby said as they shared tiramisu for dessert, I researched you after our dinner. Zimmerman Maritime's environmental initiatives are quite progressive for the industry. Oliver felt oddly pleased that she'd looked him up. It's good business. Sustainable practices save money in the long run, and our clients care about their carbon footprint. Is that the only reason? Ruby asked perceptively. Oliver hesitated. No. My sister got involved with environmental activism in college, made me see that I had a responsibility to do better. The oceans have given me everything. Least I can do is try to protect them. Ruby's smile was warm. I like that you can admit when you've changed your mind. What about you? What changed your mind about going on a date with me? Oliver asked. Ruby took a sip of her wine. I haven't changed my mind about anything. I was interested from the start, but cautious. Men with money often expect certain things. And what do I expect? Oliver asked softly. That's what I'm trying to figure out, Ruby replied honestly. As Oliver walked Ruby to her apartment in the East Village, a far cry from his penthouse on Central Park West, he found himself more intrigued than ever. Her building was old but well-maintained, with a small community garden in the front. This is me, Ruby said, stopping at the entrance. I had a wonderful time, Oliver said, suddenly feeling like a teenager on his first date. So did I, Ruby replied. She stood on tiptoe and kissed his cheek. Good night, Oliver. He watched her enter the building before turning away, a smile playing on his lips. For the first time in years, Oliver felt the thrill of something new and unpredictable. Over the next few weeks, Oliver and Ruby's relationship deepened. They explored New York together, not the high society events Oliver usually attended, but small galleries in Brooklyn, jazz clubs in Harlem, and hidden bookstores in the Village. You've lived here your whole life and never been to the cloisters? Ruby asked incredulously as they walked through the medieval art museum overlooking the Hudson. I've been busy, Oliver defended himself with a laugh. Too busy for beauty, Ruby teased, gesturing to the stunning architecture around them. Not anymore, Oliver said quietly, looking at her rather than the building. Ruby blushed and took his hand, leading him toward a secluded garden. These plants are all species that would have been grown in medieval monasteries, she explained. Herbs for medicine, flowers for dyes and perfumes. How do you know all this? Oliver asked, genuinely impressed. I read the information plaque over there, Ruby admitted with a laugh, but I did study medieval art restoration techniques, so I know a little about the period. As they sat on a stone bench overlooking the river, Oliver realized he'd never felt so comfortable with anyone. Ruby didn't expect him to be the powerful CEO or the wealthy socialite. With her, he was just Oliver, the boy who still loved Hemingway and secretly watched cooking shows at night. My board meeting ran late, Oliver apologized one evening, rushing into a small theater where Ruby was waiting. Did I miss the start? Just the previews, Ruby whispered as he settled beside her. But you didn't have to come. I know how important those meetings are. This is important too, Oliver said firmly, taking her hand. The documentary about a small village in Italy known for its traditional textile crafts wasn't something Oliver would have chosen himself, but he found himself engrossed. Afterward, over coffee at a nearby cafe, they discussed the parallels between preserving traditional crafts and Ruby's work in art restoration. It's about valuing our heritage, Ruby said passionately. These skills and traditions connect us to our past, help us understand where we came from. Is that why you restore paintings, to connect with the past? Oliver asked. Ruby considered his question. Partly, but it's also about preserving beauty for future generations. Art tells us who we were, but also reminds us of our capacity for creation and expression. She looked at him curiously. What about you? What drives your work? Oliver had never been asked that question in quite that way before. People usually asked about his business strategy or investment philosophy, not what drove him personally. Initially, it was about security, he admitted. Growing up without money, I wanted to build something stable, but now, he paused. Now it's about legacy, creating something that matters, that employs people fairly, that maybe makes the world a little better. Ruby reached across the table and took his hand. That's a good answer. One rainy Saturday, when their plans to visit a sculpture garden were washed out, they ended up at Ruby's apartment. It was small but filled with character bookshelves crammed with art history volumes, a workspace covered with specialized tools and magnifying equipment, and walls adorned with prints of famous paintings. "Sorry about the mess," Ruby said, quickly gathering some papers from her sofa. "I wasn't expecting company. I like it," Oliver said honestly. "It feels lived in, like a home." "As opposed to your sterile museum of a penthouse," Ruby teased. "It is rather impersonal, isn't it?" Oliver admitted. "The decorator did everything. I never really thought about making it my own." "Why not?" Ruby asked, genuinely curious. Oliver shrugged. "I'm rarely there except to sleep, between work and travel." "That sounds lonely," Ruby observed, not unkindly. "I never thought about it that way," Oliver said slowly, "but I suppose it is." They spent the afternoon cooking together. Ruby taught Oliver how to make her grandmother's paella, and talking about everything from childhood memories to favorite books. When Oliver accidentally spilled tomato sauce on his expensive shirt, Ruby just laughed and handed him a stain remover. "The restoration expert to the rescue," he joked. "I'm multi-talented," she replied with a wink. As evening fell and rain continued to pour outside, they settled on Ruby's worn but comfortable sofa, a bottle of wine between them. "Tell me something you've never told anyone else," Ruby said, her head resting on Oliver's shoulder. Oliver thought for a moment. "I'm afraid of failure," he finally said. "Not small failures, but catastrophic ones. I worry that one day everything I've built will collapse and I'll be that angry, poor kid again." Ruby sat up to look at him properly. "That's why you work so hard, to outrun that fear." "I suppose so," Oliver admitted. "What about you? What's your secret?" Ruby took a sip of wine. "I'm afraid I'll never be good enough. That one day someone will realize I don't deserve to handle these masterpieces, that I'm an imposter." "You, with your talent," Oliver shook his head in disbelief. "We all have our insecurities," Ruby said with a small smile. "Even successful shipping magnates." In that moment, looking at her in the soft lamplight of her apartment, Oliver realized he was falling in love with Ruby Torres. The thought both terrified and exhilarated him. "Ruby," he said softly, touching her cheek. She met his eyes, and he saw his own feelings reflected there. When they kissed, it felt like coming home to a place he'd never been before. Their relationship deepened over the following months. Oliver found himself spending more time at Ruby's apartment than his own penthouse. He cleared space in his schedule for museum exhibitions and quiet evenings reading together. Ruby introduced him to her colleagues at the Met, who treated him like Ruby's boyfriend, not a wealthy donor, but challenges arose as their worlds collided. At a charity gala Oliver had to attend, Ruby felt out of place among the social elite. "Everyone keeps asking what I do, then looking confused when I explain art restoration," Ruby whispered to Oliver as they stood near the bar. One woman actually asked if that was like being a house painter. Oliver squeezed her hand. They're just not used to meeting people with actual skills and passion. Later that night, Ruby confessed her discomfort. "I felt like everyone was wondering what you see in me. The waiters kept assuming I worked there." "I don't care what they think," Oliver said firmly. "I care about you." "But that's your world, Oliver. Those are your business associates, your social connections." "They're not my world," Oliver insisted. "They're just people I do business with." Similarly, when Oliver attended a museum function with Ruby, he felt equally out of place among the academics and art historians. "They kept talking about period-specific pigments and canvas weaves," he complained afterward. "I had no idea what anyone was saying," Ruby laughed. "Now you know how I felt at your gala, but did you notice how they all warmed up when you asked questions?" People love sharing their passion with someone who's genuinely interested. It was a lesson for both of them that bridging their different worlds required patience and a willingness to step outside their comfort zones. 6 months into their relationship, Oliver faced a crisis at work. One of his ships had mechanical issues off the coast of Namibia, causing delays that threatened to break contracts with major clients. "I have to fly to Cape Town," he told Ruby, already packing his suitcase. "Then drive up to the port. I might be gone for weeks." Ruby sat on the edge of his bed watching him pack. "I understand, it's your company." "You're not upset?" Oliver asked, pausing. "I'd rather have you here, but I know who you are," Ruby said simply. "Your business is part of you. I wouldn't ask you to ignore a crisis." Her understanding meant everything to him. Previous relationships had faltered whenever business took precedence, with accusations of neglect and demands for attention. "Come with me," Oliver said impulsively. "What?" Ruby looked startled. "Come to Africa. You can explore Cape Town while I deal with the ship issues. Then maybe we can take a few days, see the countryside." "I can't just leave my job," Ruby protested. "Ask for leave. A week. That's all I'm asking," Oliver said, taking her hands. "I don't want to be apart from you." Ruby's face softened. "Let me see what I can do." To his surprise and delight, Ruby managed to arrange emergency leave, and they flew to Cape Town together the next day. While Oliver spent long days at the port dealing with mechanical engineers and shipping delays, Ruby explored the city's museums and art scene. In the evenings, they reconnected over dinner, sharing their days. Oliver was struck by how Ruby's perspective helped him see the situation differently. "Maybe this is an opportunity to upgrade your fleet's maintenance protocols," she suggested one night. "Like in restoration, sometimes damage reveals underlying issues that needed attention anyway." Her insight led Oliver to implement a new preventative maintenance system that would ultimately save his company millions. On their last day in Africa, with the crisis resolved, Oliver took Ruby to a small private beach he'd rented for the day. As the sun began to set over the Atlantic, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, Oliver knew it was time. "I've been thinking about something you said when we first met," he began, taking her hands in his. "About looking beyond what's directly in front of you to see the full picture." Ruby smiled at the memory, the Botticelli restoration. "Yes, for years I've been focused on what was right in front of me, building my business, acquiring wealth, expanding my influence. I never saw the full picture." Oliver took a deep breath. "Until I met you." Ruby's eyes widened as Oliver dropped to one knee on the sand. "Ruby Torres, you've restored something in me I didn't even know was damaged, my ability to connect, to be vulnerable, to love completely." He pulled a small box from his pocket and opened it to reveal a vintage emerald ring. "This belonged to my grandmother. She always said it should go to someone who saw value beyond price. That's you, Ruby. Will you marry me?" Tears filled Ruby's eyes as she nodded. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Oliver." As he slipped the ring onto her finger, the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over them both. "It's perfect," Ruby said, admiring the way the emerald caught the light. "How did you know I'd prefer a vintage ring to a new one?" "Because I know you," Oliver said simply. "You value history and craftsmanship over flashiness, just like I value substance over appearance, thanks to you." Their wedding, 6 months later, reflected their blended worlds. Held in the sculpture garden of the Metropolitan Museum, it combined elegance with artistic beauty. Oliver's business associates mingled with Ruby's conservation colleagues. Samantha, as maid of honor, took full credit for introducing them. "I knew from that first dinner," she declared in her speech, "that my brother had finally met his match. Someone who wasn't impressed by his money, but saw the man beneath the millions." A year after their wedding, Oliver surprised Ruby by purchasing a brownstone in Greenwich Village, walking distance to the Met, but with enough space for them both to pursue their passions. The basement became Ruby's private conservation studio, while the top floor housed Oliver's home office. Together, they filled the house with a combination of fine art, comfortable furniture, and personal mementos. It became the home neither had fully had before, a place that represented both of them. "I've been thinking," Oliver said one evening as they sat in their garden, "about starting a foundation for art conservation training, something to help promising students who can't afford specialized education." Ruby looked at him with surprise and delight. "That's a wonderful idea. What brought this on? You did," Oliver said simply. "Seeing your work, understanding its importance. Art shouldn't be preserved just for the wealthy. It belongs to everyone." Ruby leaned over to kiss him. "I love you, Oliver Zimmerman. Even though I'm just a boring businessman," he teased. "There's nothing boring about a man who can see beyond the surface," Ruby replied, echoing their first conversation. 2 years later, their family expanded with the birth of their daughter, Sophia. As Oliver held his newborn child with Ruby watching from the hospital bed, he marveled at how completely his life had changed since that family dinner when his sister had brought along her best friend. "She has your eyes," Ruby said softly. "And your determination," Oliver replied, as the tiny baby gripped his finger with surprising strength. The Torres Zimmerman Conservation Fellowship was established the day Sophia was born, ensuring that future generations of art restorers would have the opportunity to study and preserve humanity's creative heritage. On Sophia's first birthday, they hosted a family dinner in their brownstone, a far cry from the formal affair in Oliver's penthouse years earlier. As Oliver looked around the table at his sister, his wife, and their daughter, he realized that his greatest accomplishment wasn't his business empire, but the family he'd built. Later that night, after guests had left and Sophia was asleep, Oliver found Ruby in their library, examining a small painting they'd recently acquired. "Happy?" he asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind. Ruby leaned back against him. "Completely. You know, sometimes I think about how close I came to not going to that dinner at your penthouse. Samantha had to practically drag me there." "Thank goodness for stubborn sisters," Oliver murmured, kissing her neck. "And thank goodness for millionaires who see beyond their wealth," Ruby added, turning in his arms to face him. As they stood there, surrounded by books and art in the home they'd created together, Oliver Zimmerman knew he'd found something far more valuable than all his ships and investments combined, a love that had restored them both.